It's totally fun. I have a lot more stories.
That you do.
Yeah.
That you do.
Guilty as charged with the stories.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of I've Got Something to Say. I'm Chris Whiting, your host for this podcast where I tell stories about my life. This week's edition is titled, Is That a Tic Tac in Your Pocket? Part 1 of the chronic What? Cles of Salt Lake City. So to start off this story, I want to tell you a little bit about what it's like to go to a movie with my beautiful wife, Jane. Every time we go see movies, Jane has like a superpower and is acutely aware of all sounds that go on around her. It's like she's got supersonic hearing. So we'll be watching a movie and she will turn to me and say, "Oh my God, do you hear that person 2 rows behind us coughing? Geez, would they just stop?" And I'll be like, "Well, no, because I'm watching the movie. I'm listening to the movie, so I don't hear that you're hearing." And then it will be, "Oh my God, we're like an hour and a half in and they're still crunching popcorn. They should be done with their treats by now." I'll be like, "Oh, I didn't notice that because I'm listening to the movie that we're watching right now." Or it'll be, "Oh my God, okay, there's cellophane in their candy box. I get it. But do you have to just go every time you get a bunch of crunch? Just stop it already." And I'll be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't notice that because there's a movie and I'm focusing on the movie." But I do try to be sympathetic to what's going on with her because there's an illness where there are these sounds that only certain people really zero in on and hear. And she is one of those people. There are certain sounds that I don't even notice, but she hears. Like we might be sitting in the living room watching TV and the cat's licking herself. I'm not going to tell you where. And she will be like, "Daisy, stop it. God, do you hear her licking all over her place?" And I'll be like, "No, I don't hear that. I'm watching the TV that we're watching." But there is, and I don't know the name, but there is an illness, a disease that causes you to hear small irritating sounds that other people don't hear. I do try to be sympathetic to that, and I'll credit my father for the reason that I'm sympathetic to that. Growing up, he worked for vocational rehabilitation, where they would help people who had disabilities, or I don't think we say disabilities anymore. I don't know what the word is, but they're otherly able, and he would help them find jobs and get gainful employment, and a very noble a noble vocation. And every year when I was little, he was involved in this thing called Barrier Awareness Day. And they would get city officials, celebrities, whoever they could. And for a day, those people would take on a barrier that they typically didn't have. So they might be in a wheelchair all day and see what that was like. Or they might wear a blindfold, or they might wear noise-canceling earmuffs. But they would see what it was like for somebody who was disabled to try and get along in the normal world. And it was to raise awareness for what it's like for people that have these situations that cause them to experience life different than us normal people. And I thought it was so cool because he'd be on the news every year and they'd interview him on the news. This was probably 3 or 4 years in a row when I was young. And I was like, holy cow, my dad's on TV. That is so cool. And it made me aware that, okay, there are people that I don't know what it's like to walk in their shoes. Okay. I don't know what it's like to deal with these sounds that my wife has to deal with that just don't impact me. So to you, Jane, I say, I'm sorry that you have to deal with those noises when the cat's licking herself or we're at the movies. And I'm doing my best to understand that you're experiencing something that I don't. So all of that as an intro that leads up to the story that I'm about to tell. This story involves a good friend of mine whom I used to work with. I've been forbade to say his or her name on the air because this individual thinks that it might impact their career. And let me just say, that's the funniest thing that will ever be said on this or any episode of this particular podcast, that this individual's career is going to be impacted. But to honor that friendship, I am not going to say this person's name. I will say that years ago, we went to Salt Lake City on a business trip. The reason this is part one of the chronic what, Coles, of Salt Lake City is because there were several things that happened on that trip that are story worthy. But I didn't want to put them all in one podcast because they're all so good. I think they all deserve their own individual storytelling. So this one actually happened at the end of this particular trip. And we had been in Salt Lake City for a week, getting certified in some kind of training or whatnot. And it had been just a fun week. And we were also worn out after going through the training and checking out the town and going and being a couple of people, you know, on the road, doing what you do. And we had a great time. Well, it was the last day of the trip. So I got up and I went to check out of my hotel, and I was so excited because I opened up the door and sitting out there was my USA Today. And there is something so nice, even today when everything's, you know, online, about holding a newspaper and hearing the sounds as you open it up. It might irritate Jane, but I like the sound of a newspaper opening up and the feel in your hands and the smell of the newsprint. It's just a multi-sensory experience, which is really nice. So I grabbed my newspaper, headed down to breakfast to meet my coworker / friend, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to save this for the ride home because we've got several hours of traveling before we get from Salt Lake City back to Kansas City. So we go down, we have breakfast and just share some fellowship and a few guffaws, I'm sure. And we head back to the airport. But first we've got to drop off the rental car. So we drop off the rental car. It's not on site at the airport. So we've got to get on a shuttle bus and ride the shuttle bus from the rental lot to the airport. So we hop on the bus. I'm up towards the front. My coworker is toward the back, and there's two other people on the bus with us besides the driver. I'm reading my USA Today. I'm seeing what's going on in sports, what's going on in life, what's happening in news. This is all fun for me just to see what's happening. And again, it's a multi-sensory experience. So I'm smelling the news print, I'm reading the stories, I'm listening to the shuffle of the paper, just having a great time. Apparently, there were other sounds going on that, just like when I go to a movie with my wife, I wasn't tuned into, but my coworker was tuned into. He / she apparently heard these two other people on the shuttle with us sort of one-upping each other on how big the sales were that they made this week. Now, keep in mind, I didn't hear any of this. I'm reading my USA Today. But this person hears the other two people going, you know, I just closed a $2 million sale. And the other guy going, really, $2 million? That's pretty good. I closed a $3 million sale. Oh, yeah? Well, last quarter, I closed $9 million. Well, this individual has an issue with people being braggadocio. So as I'm sitting reading my paper, really enjoying the ride from the lot to the airport, my coworker is hearing these two people brag, and it's like nails on a chalkboard to him or her. And this person hits a point where they cannot take it anymore. So they are tired of these two braggarts making them feel uncomfortable. So this individual decides it's time for me to make the braggarts feel uncomfortable. So as I sit there and I'm reading my newspaper, I hear a very loud, exaggerated question thrown my way. Hey, Chris, have you got that penis enlargement surgery yet? I hear this and I just put my head down, close my eyes, because I know that trying to ignore or turn this person off of their stream of thought is useless. The only thing I can do is roll with it. So I take a deep breath or two and think, okay, don't fight it. Don't fight it. This isn't a time to be aggressive. Let's just jujitsu with this and roll with it and see what's happened. So I go, yes, I got the penis enlargement surgery. First of all, I don't even know if that's a thing. And if it is, if you want to contact this podcast and let me know it is, that would be great. But I didn't know what else to do. So then this individual comes back with, oh, really? So how big is it? And again, another big heave and a sigh on my part. And let me just say, at this point, I knew the other two individuals were talking. I didn't know what they were talking about. They've stopped talking. It is silence in the shuttle bus at this point. So when the question comes, how big is it? Another on my part just, well, it's not film worthy, but I'm not hung like a light switch either. And then I hear, oh, so they don't call you Peach Tic Tac at the gym anymore? To which I say, no, they don't call me Peach Tic Tac at the gym anymore. After that, we all rode in silence. The driver, my coworker, myself, and the two gentlemen who previously were bragging about the sizes of their sales. So that's a little tease. There's more to come on this particular trip to Salt Lake City. But for now, that does it for this edition of I've Got Something to Say. I'm Chris Whiting. Thank you so very much for listening to this podcast. Really appreciate the new listeners, the loyal listeners, all of you out there. Also, big appreciation to KCTK Radio and my good buddy Paul, who makes this happen. This podcast would not happen if it wasn't for Paul and KCTK. I urge you to check out all of their fine programming. Many shows are produced here. The week review, the midweek update, the coaching show. There's so many. So take a listen. Thanks. I think we do have time for one caller.
Yeah, first-time caller, long-time listeners, Frank from San Diego.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I got a question.
Of course you do.
Would you say this person was a blocker to you reading your thing, everything like that?
I would say that I was trying to read my paper and I was definitely blocked from finishing the article.
Oh, okay. Did he keep, or he or she, did he keep drumming the same thing over and over again?
Certainly was continuing to drum on the same topic and tell everybody on that bus.
Would you call him a bald-faced person? Him or her?
I would say that he or she was definitely...
Okay, one last question. How big is it?